we spent a few days working on cleaning behind this gasket. You can see there's what looks like a little bit of black residue left on here. That is pretty well right down to the metal. I've tried a bunch of different chemicals. I've used different various grits of fine sandpaper and emery cloth and Scotch-Brite pads and brake cleaner and just about everything else. That really is not going to come off. And I'm concerned that if I go any further, I'm going to damage the finish or that create some gaps or holes or something. So I don't want to go any further than that. You can see we got the gasket in. The issue I'm going to have with the gasket, as you can see, is because this was mailed in, it's a little bit bent. So holding it in place until it can be torqued down is going to be a bit of an issue that I'll work with. And the other thing is I replaced this gasket right around here. It comes in the pack with this gasket. So you can see that we're ready to put the water pump back on. We've cleaned out a lot of stuff, made sure it was as clean as we could get it and as smooth as we could get it without damaging the metal. And now we're ready to put it back together. So there's the old water pump and the bolts and studs from the old water pump. And there's the new water pump and the bolts and gaskets that came with the water pump. Okay, we got the water pump back in. You can see here we have a couple of studs that went in, this one here and this one here. This bolt down here, or nut rather, I called it a bolt before, it should be a nut. And then you'll see we got 1, 2, 3 up here, 4 and 5 bolts that have gone in. When this thing went in, by the way, this was another pain in the ass to get this thing back in. So the way I got it in was I sort of put the gasket in, made sure the gasket was in place, slid on the water pump as far as I could, then started putting bolts in, and while ensuring that gasket was still up on, there's a ring that sticks out of one of the bolt holes over here, making sure it was still in place. And then just sort of lightly tapping it in up top here and various non-important areas like down here with a rubber mallet very gently to try to get it to sort of go back in, and then tightening it down and tapping it and tightening it down. And now I'm just ready to torque it. So next I have to remove this, which is the toggle for the tensioner pulley. And we got new tensioner pulley, and we also have the second pulley to go over here. We're also going to put that on. I also replaced this one plastic piece right here. I just slipped it back in. It clips on all the way around. Okay, here's the old tensioner pulley and the old tensioner pulley housing. And you can see it's got this great big bolt with a washer on the back. And then this bolt is what holds on the pulley, and there's a washer and a nut, as you can see in the new one right here. So here's the new rig, and here's the old rig. How I got this bolt out was just with one of these big whoop-ass Allen wrenches. Don't know the size. It's big. It worked. That's what counts. So you can see we've got the timing belt back in. I did want to mention that when I put these two back in, I did use thread locker on those threads. Told them place thread locker blue. So it's not the permanent one. It's the one step below that. When you're putting these back in, when you're putting the new timing belt on, you really, really have to be careful to make sure that everything lines up as it should be on the actual crank pulleys and camshaft pulley down below. If you don't get every single tooth in the right place, you'll blow your engine out. So you don't want to do that. So make sure that you're very careful and take your time to make sure that everything lines up the way it should be. I mean, I go as well and take the old timing belt and mark it, and then tape the two together and make sure all the teeth line up, that I got the right belt, that somebody hasn't screwed up. Sometimes the manufacturers can screw up if you're using a cheaper belt, so you just got to make sure that everything is absolutely 100% perfect when you put this back on here. And the next thing I'm ready to do is put the actual tensioner plunger back in and pull the pin on it. Again, make sure everything is lined up perfectly. Okay, the other thing I want to mention is that if you get this belt on
incorrectly, you will find you'll have a hard time lining up those marks, especially at the bottom there. So if you're having that issue, you might have the belt on the wrong way. For the sake of argument, in this case, right cam, left cam, that's when you're in the driver's seat, not when you're facing the engine. In that case, everything lines up perfectly in this case. Okay, so you can see we've got the tensioner pulley plunger back in, so it's ready to roll. We just have to pull this pin out to release the tension, put the tension back on the belt. Before we do that, we want to make sure, and we did this already, made sure everything is nice, that the belt's all lined up, it's in its right position, nothing's sitting anywhere it shouldn't be. Everything goes back through, that all the marks are still perfectly lined up, and I did check the one down below. And then I put the this cam's crankshaft sprocket guide back on, so that's back in there. Make sure again you put it so it's sort of the cup side, it's indented, and make sure the indent's at the back, or the indent is sort of facing forward. It's cup shaped, so it should go back in the exact same way you took it out. And with that everything in place, we're ready to sort of pull that tensioner release, and then we'll put the bottom cover back on here, bottom timing belt cover. Okay, there's the lower timing belt cover on, put on with 4 bolts. I pulled the pin on the plunger, and I noticed the plunger didn't actually engage. So what I did was I took a pry and very carefully pried up the actual tensioner pulley, and that put the tension back on it, and then I double checked and took a couple of pictures to make sure that the plunger was actually up, and it was. So I don't have an issue with that. The belt is nice and tight, but I did notice when I first pulled the plunger, it just sort of fell out. Nothing really happened. It certainly wasn't a very heavy-duty push or anything like that on the actual tensioner pulley. But I just, like I said, I just put a pry in there and sort of pried up the pulley a bit and gave the plunger more room to come up, and then I validated that the plunger was actually doing its job. It just might be an issue if you were to, for whatever reason, the plunger didn't work. Make double sure that it's working, because you don't want to start the engine with these timing belt sort of loose. Otherwise that'll blow up your engine. Okay, so there's the fan pulley. It's attached by basically a nut and 4 bolts. Also, you can see down there is the new tool that arrived from Amazon for actually correctly tightening and loosening the crankshaft pulley. We used the 2x4 because this thing hadn't arrived, and then this thing showed up a few days later. It's a super solid tool. It's really well constructed, and that is the correct tool for using. You can see everything else is still all ready to go, and we're going to now work on getting this horrendous AC compressor back up into place so it can attach back onto the bracket that holds that fan pulley. Okay, there's the AC compressor, and you can see a couple of these things in here, these bolts in here. This is they're all 14 mil. This is 114 mil with a bracket, and then back up in here is another 14 mil. It's right up in here, and that goes through the AC unit up into the fan housing up there. And of course then there's this bolt right in here, which is another 14 mil. It also goes up into the fan housing up there. And then way back over here, you will see if I can get it lined up right, you will see way back up in here is another 14 mil right here. That's a little bit of a difficult one to get to. That's holding up the back of the thing. So I would suggest loosening this, but not necessarily dropping it all the way out. And then coming around to the front and working on these ones under here and that one up there to get this thing out. It's a bit of a pain in the ass to get out, and it's certainly a pain in the ass to get back in, but it's done. Okay, so there's our new idler pulley for the Serpentine belt. Two nuts, 1 bolt down below here, and it just sits on the
on the pin here before the generator goes on. And then you can see we've also got the generator on, which has one nut here and one bolt down here, 14 mil. Again, those are torqued to the specs that you would get with your kit or online for your particular vehicle. Whatever the torque specs say, follow them. And next we're going to go after this power steering unit right here. Okay, so we got the power steering back on. There's 3 bolts. There's one in here, one back through here, and one down here. They mount up, it gives you that. I also put the upper timing belt cover back on. It basically just had 2 bolts. It had one here and one down here, and yeah, that was a DFU. I put that in, and then I realized I had to take it back out and retorque it once it's back in. So there you go, 1, 2, back in, upper timing belt cover. Okay, so I reattached the right side timing belt cover. Right side if you're facing the car, left side if you're inside the car. It has 4 bolts, 1, 2, third one down here, and a 4th one back over and right in here. It also came with some additional difficulties. The first one is that, let me get down here, you can see there's this grommet right here, and that's the cam speed sensor. Has to come through this grommet, so you got to feed it through, then push the grommet back in there. It comes around, clips down under here, then comes back up and back in here. I don't know if you can actually see it. There's a clipping mechanism back in there that had to go through a hole. So I just put the two electrical components together and the clip on, and then pushed it back inside the hole. The clip is the black piece right at the very bottom there, and it just fits inside a hole there. Last thing we got to do is put some of these electrical cables back in. They just snap into place. You can also see I reattached this oil pipe right in here. With a 10 mil here and a 10 mil down here. And I'm also going to reattach this electrical component right in here. And once we get that in place, oh, there it goes. We'll just make sure we got these clips, these electrical clips holding these wires back where they should be. There's one right in there. You see that pops right in really nicely. And just make sure everything's sort of back into its place where it should be sitting. And I think we're pretty good to go here. We still have to tighten up our camshaft pulley. And we got a few other pieces up top here to go. Alright, we got our left side or right side if you're inside the vehicle. Timing belt cover on. Comes with 3 bolts, 1, 2, third one down here, and then this center bolt, which is a long bolt that goes through the back side. Okay, so you can see that I've got the thermostat housing ready to go back on, and there's RTV sealant on both. Got a brand new gasket right there. We also put a brand new gasket on here that came with the kit, so we're just going to attach it with 2 bolts. In the original takeoff video I'd said there was a 3rd bolt, but in fact it wasn't a 3rd bolt. It wasn't holding on the actual thermostat housing. It was holding on this timing belt cover. So that is not 3 bolts when you take this off. It's just 2. And there they are right there, 1 and 2. You can see I got the thermostat housing back on. I got this coolant line that goes down towards the oil filter. Now I call it the oil line, but it's not. But it's back on, and I've reattached it with this clip here. These things have been torqued down. Again, there's only 2 bolts. The 3rd one down here was actually what I thought was holding it on in the takeout video. It was actually holding on this upper timing cover. So it's only 2 bolts. I have the new thermostat with the new washer put in, and it clips on. It sort of goes around the edge of this thing and clips in, and then this thing will go in like so, and then we'll crank down the 3 bolts and lock that into place. Okay, here's the idler pulley. There's the new one and the old one. So this is the front side of the idler pulley. This is, you can see it's got an indentation there. This is the back side. This is the side that goes onto the engine like this. And then this piece here just fits right on top like that with the bolt. And then torqued on. Okay, so we put the fan back on. You can see there's There's four bolts down here, and you're going to have to find a way to tighten those up, mostly by jamming another screwdriver in there. And then we also put the serpentine belt back on, and that was by using this tensioner pulley and pushing downward on this side, and it released it, and then we were able to release it once the belt was back on. And there you can see the actual configuration for our drive belt or serpentine belt. Here's the rad back in. Before we put the rad back in, we put the cowling, the fan cowling back over the fan so we could move it back into place, and pulled this AC line and this electrical line up high. The radiator just slides right down in there without any issue, but it sits on little feet that go through the wall, and by feet I mean this little pin right here. So there's one on either side. It goes through and holds these bolts into place so you can get them in. There's 1-2 bolt on this side and 2 bolts down there. 2 bolts down there, you can see, and there's another pin down there as well. And underneath there's that nut there and that nut there, and they sort of go through a grommeting configuration right down in here. You see there's a grommet behind here that isn't attached to anything, it just sits there, and then it comes through, and this large bolt goes through another rubber grommet, and it basically just goes through and gets the nut on the other side and clamps it all down, torque it all down, and you're ready to go to the next step. Some miscellaneous cleanup stuff we got going on. We had to reattach this bracket here that holds on the AC line and the electrical line, and reclamp the electrical line underneath here. Put the rad cap back on and the filler hose back in. We did this side for the AC bracket holder, and there's also a clamp under there, and then we reclamped the electrical over on this side. I reattached these old cooler hoses back on for the time being. I ordered a couple new ones from Rock Auto, but they won't be here for a week or so. So I just reattached these old ones. And this is one omission. When I was putting this fan shroud back on, there's a bolt, third bolt. There's not 2, there's a third bolt right down here. It's a 12 mil. So I just wanted to mention that. When you're putting it on, there's 3 bolts. There's one there, and then one right there, and then one over here as well. So I reattached the coolant line, lower coolant line, we're underneath the vehicle now, along with the 1 and 2 transmission coolant lines. Also made sure that this plug was closed again before I put fluid into it. And like I said, we're going to leave the skid plates off for now because I'm going to be doing an axle change on this vehicle. We'll do that in another video. So right now we're going to leave the skid plates off, but the skid plates go on with just a bunch of bolts. It's nothing too complicated about that. Air handling box. And what we have is we have one clamp here, tightened with a Phillips or I think it's a 12 mil, 10 mil maybe, 10 mil. Here's another clamp here, 10 mil. This box goes on 2 pegs, 10 mils again. There's one there. And then there's one way at the back down there. That's the second one. This vacuum line has to go on. This line goes on with this butterfly clamp thing. And this line goes on as well. And both of these clip into holders. Holders down below, down here. There's 2 clips that those lines go into. And then the last thing is to secure the air box with 1, 2, 3, 4 clips. This thing goes in right in here. Just slides in and snaps until it's in. And that's that part. Now we'll go with the cowling. Okay, cowling on, 2 bolts, 2 studs or 2 nuts, and make sure you put your oil cap back on. Last step in the process. There's the Toyota Red antifreeze concentrate. We're going to mix it 50-50 with this distilled water we picked up at the store, the local grocery store. So a 50-50 mix, we'll put it in the car, and then we're ready to start it up. Okay, so that's it. Fluids are in. Double check the oil to make sure we hadn't lost too much when we took off the the oil filter, but everything seems okay. So made sure we topped up this reservoir. We put in about maybe about 5 liters, 5.5 liters of concentrate, mixed half and half with water, so another 5 liters of distilled water mixed into it. And now we're going to run it. We're going to burp it. There's probably lots of videos online about how to burp your engine, but for the coolant. But basically, we're going to run it and cycle it through and add more fluid, and then run it and cycle it through and add more fluid, and keep doing that until we get all the bubbles out of the cooling system. And that's it. We're just burping the coolant. We have one person stepping on the gas on the inside. We're just burping the bubbles out here.